In November of 1970, Albert Finney hit the big screen as a miserly old man visited by 4 ghosts, whose sole objective it is to redeem the soul of Scrooge. Albert Finney would go on to win a Golden Globe for the Best Actor in a Musical Comedy, and the film itself would be nominated for 4 Academy Awards. The little production that would pull the music out of the Charles Dickens novel A Christmas Carol was an absolute hit. For my own Father Christmas, whose birthday was on Christmas proper, it was a delightful gift which he immediately embraced, and each year of my childhood my sister and I would dance through the house belting out all the songs, accompanied by a vinyl record. We knew every word by heart and waited with great anticipation for Christmas Eve, when it was our tradition to settle down with finger foods and treats and watch the film, before curling up next to our father as he read the Christmas story of the child born in Bethlehem. The 2 stories seemed to dovetail together perfectly in their common theme of redemption, and even as children we understood this. This was the meaning of Christmas. But in the fall of 1843, as Charles Dickens stood on the stage that he was sharing with Richard Cobden, a liberal English politician, and Benjamin Disraeli, the first Earl of Beaconsfield, conservative statesman and future Prime Minister, it occurred to him that as Christmas approached, there were far too many working poor whose plight would leave them untouched by the meaning of Christmas. He was sensitive to their predicament, as his own childhood had been interrupted when his father had been let go from his job in the British Navy, plunging the Dickens family into debt, and his father into debtor's prison by 1824. The rest of the family had soon joined their patriarch, with the exception of 12-year-old Charles and his sister Fanny. Fanny had been accepted to the Royal Academy of Music the year before, and their parents had made the unusual decision to continue to pay for her education. Charles, however, was sent to work at a boot-blacking factory, where his feelings of hopelessness, fright, and abandonment developed in the tender child a sense of anger at social injustice. Struggling through 12 to 16-hour workdays, 6 days a week in the factory that sat just off the Strand in London, he wrote of feeling utterly neglected. After 3 years, he was able to return to school and set his bright mind to a literary career, first working as a newspaper journalist for his uncle, concentrating on political themes, and then as an extremely popular novelist in Victorian England. At the age of 20, he had published his first story in a monthly magazine, and 4 years later wrote the successful Pickwick Papers. Charles John Huffman Dickens had plenty to say, and everyone was listening as he continued to write one critically acclaimed novel after another. Great Expectations, David Copperfield, Bleak House, A Tale of Two Cities. He was the first author to be a popular sensation in his own lifetime, and it had given him a voice and a platform to advocate for the abysmal working conditions and the lack of education for those just barely subsisting in the slums of London. And so there he stood, at a soiree in the north of England, preparing to address the Manchester Athenaeum, an organization lobbying for better working conditions and an improvement in societal structure. And suddenly his mind was filled with a story, littered with characters that sprang from his own experiences and influenced by the limited prospects of his disabled nephew. He could just write a newspaper article expounding on the dreadful, almost inhuman plight of the poor, he thought, but quickly dismissed the idea, as any gentleman reading this morning paper could easily breeze by it and turn his focus to more pleasantly undemanding topics. But what he really wanted was to tell a dramatic story that would engage the reader so deeply that their soul would feel the piercing of every word and be unable to shake off the imprint which was left. With the meeting completed, the inspired author hurried back to London, where he walked each night for hours around the storied town, developing his little Christmas tale. And London would bleed all over his pages, with its brooding, twisting streets, and inclement weather that mirrored Scrooge's soul. As he excitedly set pen to paper and brought the miserly man to life, he found himself creating a main character so desperately degenerate that he had little to redeem him to humanity, if anything at all. Even those wretches condemned to wander the earth in misery felt a tremor of terror at Scrooge's probable fate. His brain, invigorated by his brisk nightly walks, imagined a door-knocker which transformed into old Marley, Scrooge's deceased business partner, catching his penny-pinching old friend unawares, and later giving him the fright of his miserable life as he visited him in his sparse excuse for living quarters. The warning that he would be visited that very night by three spirits, Christmas past, present, and future, is met by a surly attempt to put the ghost in his place by accusing him of being just a bit of undigested beef. This, as you might imagine, is not received particularly well, and ends with the offended spectre raising the roof with his displeasure, until Scrooge yields to his transparent, ill-tempered partner. With growing anticipation, the 31-year-old author laid out the journey of the degenerate old sinner who loved money far more than his fellow man, and had set himself in his own reckoning as both a pillar of virtue and the unfortunate victim of a slovenly society out to take advantage of poor unfortunate him. But as he journeys through the past, experiences the present, and witnesses his bleak future, his heart is entirely regenerated, and he arises on Christmas morning eager to use his rarely spent wealth for the benefit of surprising friends and family, and even strangers. Charles Dickens unfolded his classic Christmas story with an expert hand. His detailed writing pierced his reader's soul by engaging their own imagination in the fight for the redemption he visualized necessary for them. Using such meticulous writing that one could hardly fail to be transported to the London of the Victorians, and practically smelling the chestnuts roasting as the hawkers call out to the passerbyers, feel the heaviness of the combined fog and soot in the air, and shiver at the icy cold that reaches into one's bones no matter how tightly one is wrapped up. In the end, Scrooge joyfully sheds the shackles of greed and bitterness, and embraces the Christmas spirit wholeheartedly, changing the future for Bob Cratchit's disabled son, Tiny Tim, and his entire family, prompting the little boy to voice the iconic line, "God bless us, everyone." So easily did this vision present itself that Dickens wrote the entire beloved story in only 6 weeks. And on December 19th, 1843, the first printing of A Christmas Carol rolled off the presses. Within a week, all 6,000 copies sold out, with the public clamoring for more, and by the end of the following year, the little book had sold 15,000 copies. Despite the great success of the novella that had struck a nerve within a populace who admired the raw honesty depicting the social conditions that were defining their times, Dickens himself didn't make much off this printing. He had fussed over the binding being just so, and the paper being a particular weight, making the book a more expensive investment initially. But anything worth doing is worth doing well, and his investment paid off in the end, with close to 3 million copies being sold since the first release. The prolific writer would continue to be lauded in the 20th century by academics and critics as a true literary genius whose body of work brought to light the plight of the working poor in a way that couldn't be easily ignored, and which helped to bring the social changes to the Victorians through painting them a picture with his words that they could no longer pretend they hadn't seen. In the little house, we still watch the 1970s musical Scrooge each year, and not just because of tradition, but because its message delivered in an engaging tale, accented with a fabulous soundtrack, is timeless. We hope you enjoyed today's Advent video. Merry Christmas, and we'll see you next time.